inviting Diane to tell us a little bit about the situation overall of the Baha'i community globally. We have a concentration of issues in Iran, but then there are some problems in a few other countries, and I'm turning it over to Diane to tell us.
So thank you, Bani, and thank you for being here. It's wonderful to see you all. And thank you, Rose, for stepping in for Ahmed Shaheed. The Baha'is have religious freedom in most countries of the world. But there are some countries where they're either persecuted gravely or discriminated in a way that actually creates a lot of problems and issues for the Baha'is to be able to live. The two countries where they face persecution are actually Iran, which is the country that really has started the persecution since the inception of the Baha'i faith, and where Baha'is, as a previous special rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, Heiner Bielefeld, had mentioned, was from cradle to grave, which means that really children, from the time that they're small, either themselves at school or with because of their parents, face persecutions, and then at university, and then Baha'is as adults when it comes to work, employment, properties, and then of course unfortunately arrests simply because of their belief, and then even when they pass away, there's desecration of cemeteries and tombs and things like that. And there's also a campaign of incitement to hatred against the Baha'is in general, which makes life of the Baha'is extremely, extremely difficult in Iran. But Iran is not keeping to its borders. It's actually exporting its persecution to other countries when it can. And one of those countries is in fact Yemen, where since the time that the Houthis have taken up the northern part of Yemen, the Baha'is face also extreme severe persecution in Yemen, along exactly the same lines as those that are in Iran. Of course, Yemen is a country at war, so things are also slightly different, but Baha'is cannot live freely at all in Yemen and practice their faith. Another countries where the Baha'is are facing discrimination, it's not persecution, but it's grave discrimination, is Qatar, where the Baha'i community is, where the authorities are trying to make life so difficult for Baha'is that they need to leave. Either they're not renewing their permits to stay, or they're not giving them a security clearance so that they can access employment, or they're also not, of course, allowing issues of families, getting married, divorced, having a cemetery, and these sorts of, which makes life of the Baha'is in Qatar extremely difficult. And another country which was raised recently is Tunisia, where very unfortunately the Baha'is are facing a couple of fatwas that consider them kafars, and infidels. And it's based on these fatwas that the government has used them to not allow the Baha'i association to be registered, which will allow them to also have their Baha'i activities. And I think that this fatwa has created some concern from the Baha'is in Tunisia, which before they were living quite freely and able to practice their faith. So it's something recent, and we hope that the Egyptian government, of course we hope that all four governments can resolve these issues, but we hope that the Tunisian government and also the Qatari authorities can resolve them. So I think this is a quick over.
So Diane, can you talk a little bit about this memorandum? There's a memorandum from 1991 signed by the supreme leader of Iran, Mr. Ali Khamenei, that actually sets out a plan and a policy on how the Baha'is are to be treated in the country. And there's a section in there that asks that it be exported even outside the country.
So, yes, so thank you, Bani. One of the points of this memorandum, which was actually uncovered by another UN Special Rapporteur, Ronaldo Galindo Paul, when he was Special Rapporteur on Iran. And this memorandum has different points about how the Baha'is should be treated in Iran, and one of them is also to destroy their cultural roots outside the country. So in fact, there is a provision for trying to encourage other governments to also persecute the Baha'is if they can.
And there are Baha'is in over 200 countries and territories, and living peacefully alongside the other citizens of the countries and the societies where they live. They're working alongside everyone for the betterment of their societies and the world. So it's particularly hurtful when they're being persecuted in their home, in the land of the origin of their faith, and also these few countries. The Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, and going back to the many Special Rapporteurs, have all focused on the situation of the Baha'is, particularly in Iran and these other countries now that Diane mentioned. And Dr. Ahmed Shaheed, in his latest report to the Human Rights Council, had an annex, an addendum, which was devoted specifically to the situation of the Baha'is. And we are delighted to have with us Rose Parris, Richter, who's the Chief of Staff of Dr. Shaheed's office. And Rose is going to tell us a little bit about the report and how it came to be, and the addendum. And I see joining us is Ambassador Rashad Hussain. Ambassador, please.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I know you're literally walking off one stage onto the other. So I'm introducing Rose Parris Richter, who's the Chief of Staff of Dr. Ahmed Shaheed's office. So Rose is going to tell us a little bit about the report, and then we'll speak with you.
I think I have a headset here. Thank you, Bani. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. As Bani noted, the Special Rapporteur on the situation of freedom of religion or belief has been focused on the Baha'i community for the past 6 years. He's also well acquainted with the situation of the Baha'is in Iran when he was Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in that country. As Bani's laid out, there are many country contexts, 4 country contexts specifically, where Baha'is are experiencing hostility, discrimination, or violence based on their religious identity. In some cases, these incidents are escalating. In response, but the Baha'i communities have been raising alarm, both for international and regional mechanisms to pay attention and to engage and intervene on the situation. Recently, the Special Rapporteur has engaged with the community through a series of consultations that took place in December of last year to document the current situation in 4 country contexts. Tunisia, as Bani laid out.
Diane.
As Diane laid out, Tunisia, Iran, Qatar, and Yemen. The circumstances in these countries vary in severity. And as Diane said earlier, in Qatar and Tunisia, they are more administrative, albeit the fatwa is a dangerous instrument that's being perpetuated against the community and is, likely to incite violence. In Iran and Yemen, however, the targeting is much more direct and has resulted in violence and/or persecution of Baha'is in those communities. I just wanted to talk about the outcome of those consultations. Now, obviously, the Special Rapporteur noted that there have been notable strides that international and regional mechanisms have made in terms of addressing the situation of the Baha'is. But clearly, there's still a lot of work to be done, and so he's issued 3 recommendations in addition to recommendations that he presented in the body of his main report to the Human Rights Council. That report was on religious minorities in conflict and insecure situations. Attached to that report is an additional study that emanates from these consultations. There are three main recommendations that the Special Rapporteur offers. Now, the first is really for states to recall their human rights obligations towards religious minorities, including the Baha'i, in accordance with Article 27 of the 1992 Declaration of Minorities, and in accordance with Article 18 of the ICCPR and the UNHDR. He's also called on states to recognize that religious communities, to recognize this community as a traditional religion and implement recommendations from UN human rights mechanisms, including from those special procedures and universal periodic review for better protecting the rights of religious minorities, including the Baha'i. He's also recommended that the UN system remain seized on engaging on the situation in various countries, and he urges them to communicate and coordinate their efforts with both local actors, including civil society where possible, but also to ensure that they coordinate themselves, especially UN programs on the ground. And this includes the UN Office on Genocide Prevention and the Responsibility to Protect, and UN country offices such as UNDP. Lastly, he recommends that states and civil society, including entities that focus on freedom of religion or belief, consider adopting platforms or mechanisms that help to highlight the persistent and concerning situations of Baha'i communities. Now, this can be in the form of forming a group of friends of Baha'i communities. It can be in the form of platforms where a coalition of actors are engaged on religious minority situations, but focused on highlighting the circumstances of the Baha'i community. I think most importantly, the Special Rapporteur points out that it's cohesion and collaboration that will that will likely help move the needle for better protections for Baha'is in the country context that are presented in his report.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rose. So this symposium that took place, which, the outcomes that we've just heard from you, was held online, and it had participation from a number of special envoys from around the world, government envoys on the issue of freedom of religion or belief. And we are delighted to have with us today Ambassador at Large Rashad Hussain from the United States on the issue of international religious freedom. And Ambassador Hussain, I'd like you to just share with us what I know the United States has taken a leading role in defending international religious freedom. You have also spoken out for the rights of the Baha'is in Iran and Yemen and elsewhere. And we'd love to hear what the US priorities are overall, but then specifically to these recommendations contained in Dr. Shaheed's report.
Thank you so much. We want to make sure that we are integrating our work to protect international religious freedom throughout our foreign policy efforts. When we deal with other countries bilaterally, as part of our regular diplomacy, we raise policies that are discriminatory. We raise laws that are on their face discriminatory, and sometimes policies that have impact on religious communities. When we're in multilateral forums, and throughout my career I've had the chance to work on a number of issues impacting international religious freedom, including the old defamation of religion resolution, moving it to the Istanbul process, so we're getting away from criminalization of speech. When we engage with civil society on human rights issues, we want to make sure that international religious freedom issues are at the forefront of that work as well. So it's got to be consistent and it's got to be integrated throughout our foreign policy work. And even and I was just mentioning in the earlier panel some of our domestic work. As we set up our educational institutions, we work with state and localities and civil society who are working to ensure that students have a digital literacy, that they can navigate the world of social media that they're seeing, which oftentimes contains so much harmful information that can undermine human dignity, can undermine they can undermine the religious freedom of people because of some of the hatred that's being spewed in many of these forums. In terms of some of the priorities that we're working on, it's been part of my work throughout government as someone who's done a lot of my diplomatic efforts in Muslim-majority countries to continue working on the protection of Christians and other religious minorities in Muslim-majority countries. And if you look at the countries of particular concern, whether you're talking about a country like Iran, or where we, of course, we have a Baha'i population, or any of the other country of particular concerns, you'll see that the persecution is taking place in a number of Muslim-majority countries amongst that group. A second area where we have really been focused on then is areas or countries in which we've had determinations that genocide are taking place. And the last two of those that have been designated in the United States have been the genocide of the Rohingya and also of the Uyghurs. And so we're seeing persecution of these minority populations and a number of other Muslim populations in countries around the world. So that continues to be a significant priority of our office, and then continuing the fight against anti-Semitism. Earlier in my career, we had a chance to have trips to the Holocaust sites with imams from the United States, and another trip with imams from around the world. And so we've had the opportunity to speak out against anti-Semitic depictions and some of the rising anti-Semitism that we're seeing, not only in our own country, but in Europe and elsewhere. And so these are some general areas, but in addition to those three, new challenges arise around the world, such as the challenges we're now seeing in Afghanistan in a more acute way than we've seen in the past. Also, of course, what's happening in Ukraine. To address the specific question about the Baha'i community, these are issues that we raise directly with governments. Just in the last week, I've had an opportunity to meet with the ambassador of Qatar to the United States to address the situation. We go into great detail with help from our civil society partners about individuals who are currently facing persecution. There's a very prominent case of someone who's actually a Qatari citizen. And then there's also individuals who have left the country already because of religious persecution they face. So we've put together spreadsheets with information and raised these issues. And I believe that we're getting a very serious response from the government in the conversations that we're having. We also, of course, raised this with Yemen. We've been speaking out about what's going on in Iran and Tunisia and other places, including in the report that we release every year, the comprehensive report on international religious freedom.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and we acknowledge all the work that the U.S. has been doing in order to highlight this situation, but also go further and try and find ways to resolve the problems when the problems arise. The Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief made one recommendation about the possibility of having a group of countries speaking out about the situation of Baha'is. And I'm wondering if the US, and I'm sorry I'm going to put you on the spot here, but I'm wondering if the US wouldn't be the one country to lead on that and then bring other partners from Europe and Canada from the north and elsewhere that might be willing to join you in working on this, because there is strength in numbers, and we know that when countries speak out, those that are perpetuating these human rights violations are listening, whether or not they come across as doing so or not.
I believe we're already doing so. So the recommendation is a powerful one. And if you look at the work of the International Religious Freedom of Belief Alliance, we've now brought together more than 35 countries, and we've been able to issue statements on the protection of a number of religious communities, including the Baha'i. So we're always open to ideas about new ways in which we can increase our leadership on these important issues.
Again, to go on a little bit of a limb, there have been negotiations on this nuclear deal, the JCPOA. Are human rights and freedom of religion being included in some of these agreements that the US has with Iran?
We continue to pursue in the most vigorous and relentless way our human rights priorities, in addition to the important objective of ensuring that we move forward in a way in which Iran does not have nuclear weapons, obviously.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Diane, do you have any closing comments?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to really say that what we have observed as the Baha'i international community is that countries, particularly such as Iran and Qatar, and even the Houthis in Yemen, which is quite surprising, and of course Tunisia, are extremely susceptible to international pressure and to statements that are made publicly. This is something that, despite sometimes they claim, and I know that Rose knows that, particularly with the Iranians, that they don't care what the UN says or they don't care what this and that government says. But in fact, they do care. And they put a lot of effort in trying to keep their nice image. And that goes for Iran, it even goes for the Houthis in Yemen, it's for sure for Qatar and Tunisia. So I think that I would really commend all the statements that are made, either by the US or IRFBA or any other organization, and of course the work of the Special Rapporteur, because and hope that this can continue, because this is really a very efficient way of putting pressure on those countries to improve their freedom of religion situation, and particularly when it comes to the case of the Baha'is.
Thank you, Diane. Rose?
I guess I'd just say that I cannot emphasize the need for collaboration and coordination between civil society, governments, and other organizations in trying to address these situations. It is the only way in which both verifiable information and pressure can come together to help to place the appropriate amount of pressure to help to move the needle. I think that it's also more than one government working in a concerted effort to place pressure on various entities. As Diane said, public pressure does matter in most cases, and in a country like Iran in particular does care about what's said about it, despite its rhetoric in the contrary.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to Ambassador Hussain and Rose and Diane for joining the panel. This is being recorded, and I believe it's going to be on the website and hopefully widely seen, also by some of the countries that need to receive this message. Thank you.